several times, and over the years, I have family originally from there, and I think I was first there in 1969, and again in the 70s, and then we've been a couple of times more recently. The most recent was about a little over a year now. And you know, I've seen a lot of changes in that time period. When I was there in the 60s, it tended to be a poor country. I mean, the people were doing okay, but you didn't see a lot of wealth. I remember trying to hitchhike from Waterford to Cork on the main road. It was like no traffic, you know, and very little. And now you go over there, you know, at that time, a family might have one car. Now it's more like the U.S. Family might have 2, 3 cars. They've built highways. It's a lot more crowded. I think the population today is of Ireland is the Republic of Ireland. The southern 5/6 of it is just under 5 million, and Northern Ireland is just under 2 million. So there's probably 6.5 million people there, and the island is about the size of the state of Maine, roughly. You know, Maine is a pretty good-sized state. It's the largest New England state. I mean, it would take you probably 8 hours to drive across it from one end to the other, north to south. But it's, as a country, it's very small compared to what we're used to. So the population has increased. I know last time we were there, highways, you know, you get on a highway from Dublin to Galway and you would be there rapidly, and there's police out there with radar. I mean, you might as well be here, you know, in some respects. So it is a, you know, a very modern, and they're doing pretty well. But again, over the years, I have seen a lot of changes. When you come in over Ireland on a plane, everything is bright green, so you get an idea why they call it the Emerald Isle. And it is beautiful. So this is, when the last time we went north of Dublin, which I really hadn't been before, not very far. This is about 45 miles north of Dublin. This is the town of Trim. I do have a map up here, so here's Dublin over here, and Trim is right here. Here's Dublin, here's Trim. We were staying in a little B&B in Navan up here, and there were several sites we wanted to see, and then we were going to take off and come over here to Connemara. But in Trim, this is Trim Castle, and it's the oldest Norman castle in Ireland, most complete as well, the largest. And it was actually used in the movie Braveheart, which was, you know, about Scottish independence, but it works, I guess. And it's not the oldest, but it is the largest and the most complete Norman castle in Ireland. And it had, I think the keep, the main building there, something in this was, the keep was 70 feet high, and they built it so you had 20 different sides on it, so anybody attacking it could never really hide. There'd always be somebody looking down at them no matter where they were, and so very, very difficult to get in. And there, as you drive around Ireland, the castle ruins are everywhere. You can keep going here. There's several different pictures here of Trim. And you get inside, and it tends to be a hollowed out thing, and with catwalks, and they take you around, give you a tour, and you wind up on top. That's what it would have looked like originally. Probably not white, but that's a model that would have shown what it was like before it fell to ruins. And this is sort of what it looks like inside today. It's really kind of dominates the countryside pretty well. This is from the top. You get an idea that you could really see everything from that area. Yeah, go ahead. Just flash these. Beautiful area. This is New Grange, now, which is also just north of Dublin. It's right up in this area over here. And it's a very ancient sort of religious site. Now they call this a tomb, but it's actually much more than that. This was built 5,000 years ago, a little over 5,000 years ago. So it's actually older than the pyramids or Stonehenge. And it was a tomb, but not originally. What they've determined is that, archaeologists did look at this from 1962. They excavated it from 1962 to 1975. And it basically is a astronomical thing that deals with the sun rising up, and on the shortest day of the year, on the solstice, it will, the sun will come in to this entrance here, and it will light up deep inside. And there's actually, so they know it had to do with the sun and the light. Like we have something similar to this right up in Salem, New Hampshire. They used to call it Mystery Hill. Now they call it American Stonehenge, I guess. And rocks do line up there. That site has been kind of torn apart over the years, starting in the 1800s, so it's hard to tell what it really is anymore. But it's definitely something. They don't know who built it or anything. Whereas this, again, it's very, very ancient, and it was for that purpose, where the sun would light up deep inside on the solstice. Later on, about 1,000 years later, during the Bronze Age, it was used as a tomb. Okay, so it is a tomb as well, but it was not originally designed for that purpose. And there's several other sites around this. This is New Grange, there's Noath and Douth, and the Hill of Tara, and all of these are from the same general time span and relate to astronomical, lining up the moon, the sun, and the stars, and all of that. And they don't really understand how they built all of this. I mean, these people were living in little shacks, and they were subsistence farmers or fishermen or whatever, and they built this, and how they got these huge rocks which weighed tons and moved them, in some cases from the Wicklow Mountains up there. And so it's sort of a mystery, like building the pyramids, I guess, to some extent is a mystery today. A lot of these other things, these standing stones, were added later in some cases, like 1,000 years later, and tie it to the tomb. And then later on, in the Middle Ages, that's when superstition gets involved, and they start tying it to fairies and leprechauns and all the various things that you think of Ireland. So but basically today it's considered one of these older sites. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and Ireland is kind of filled with a lot of those, actually. Ireland, Scotland, England, filled with those type of sites, but Ireland especially, because it was kind of left, it was in the backwater, and they didn't destroy a lot of this. I know from that original hilltop, this site takes about an acre. Down below it in a field, you would see cattle grazing, and there's another mound there, and it's never been excavated. And we know it's tied to this, but they don't really know what's in there, and it probably was used as a tomb and everything else later on as well. So these things are kind of all over Ireland, but this is one of the bigger ones here. There's the one in the field I was talking about that has simply never been excavated at all. I've never even looked at it. Whereas, a lot of these were probably across Europe, but over centuries they get destroyed, whereas in Ireland they simply didn't. It was kind of lucky. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is, so after we left New Grange, this area here, we then came to over north of Galway. This is Galway Bay. And we came up to Connemara, which is this area right in here. There's a close-up map of Connemara here. And this is Kylemore Abbey, which was a castle built by a very rich person. Okay, and it looks very old, and it isn't. It was built in 1867, actually. So by Irish standards, it's new. And he was very, very wealthy. The area is dominated by, well, it's like about 1,000 acres, and they have a 6-acre Victorian walled garden, and it's extremely beautiful. This man, Henry, who built it, his last name was Henry, he and his wife are buried there, and then it got sold to a friend. It went through a whole series of different things. Finally, in 1920, Benedictine nuns from Belgium, who had lost their own abbey in World War I, it was destroyed, came there and took it over and set up a girls' school, which lasted until 1910. Now the nuns are still there, and I guess the Catholic Church controls it, owns it. But when we were there, Notre Dame University was actually teaching a couple classes there. So I don't know if that was part of their summer program or whatever, or it wasn't summertime, but their fall program or something like that. But it's extremely beautiful, very, very nice. They had some sheep that got loose while we were there and were running around eating the garden, which the guys had to come and get those sheep out of there. But it is really nice, and it's been, at one point, the person that owned it after the original owner had a gambling problem. He kind of lost a lot of his money, so he married a rich American heiress, always works. And she came in, but then she renovated the place, and she took out a lot of the Gothic things and big marble columns and put up paneling and did all this stuff that was kind of unfortunate, actually. So when you tour inside, the tour inside isn't really that much. It's been changed too much, I think. But outside, it's absolutely beautiful. And the garden is kind of incredible. Connemara itself, here's the sheep getting ready to break into the garden, I think. Yeah, go ahead. You can, yeah, that just shows you the wall of the garden. Again, it's on a very large site, so the castle's here, and the garden's over here. And they actually were on a bus back and forth. We walked it because it was just beautiful. It was a beautiful way to walk down and walk down the garden. But it is very, very nice. Yeah. And this just shows the lake in that area. So, Connemara itself is kind of a tribal area. It's named after a tribe, Kanak. It goes way, way back. And they still have a dispute as to exactly where the borders of Connemara are. I mean, it's not a county, it's part of County Galway. And so it's just an area, and they actually dispute where it ends, where it begins, and that sort of thing. But it's extremely beautiful. It was one of the, yeah, stop right there, that's good. One of the sections of Ireland. It was kind of in the backwater out here. And there really wasn't much there. You had some large estates owned by British lords, and it was divided up into little tenant farmers who were very, very poor. And when Henry bought that area and built Kylemore, he took over a lot of those tenants, and he was very good. And it was said he would hire workers to work on building his new house and the castle there, and a farmer or a worker from that area could make as much in 2 months that normally took them a year to make. So they would walk for miles just to work there and get some money. He also wound up with a lot of tenants there, and so what he did is he was kind of a nice man, and he wanted them to have windows. They didn't have windows in their houses, because the British had a tax on glass, and so because of that, he encouraged them, and he tried to get a window in at least one window in everybody's house, so they could open a window and let the air in, but also have a light and see out at the same time. So he was a pretty good guy, actually, a really nice guy. I think that's where the term, I have the term here somewhere. I can't if I find it, where daylight robbery comes from, is from the British tax on glass. So the British didn't really treat the Irish very well, I'm sure you all know that. So in Connemara anyway, while we're there, we stayed in Clifton, and we did a loop around here. And this is the town of Roundstone, which is down here. Again, very beautiful. We stopped there for lunch or whatever. There's the Connemara National Park, and it's about 5,000 acres, and it's beautiful bogs, wild bogs and mountains. The mountains are called the 10 Bends, and I guess the locals call it the 10 Pins, just to be different. I guess that separates you. If you went in and said it was the Pins, they'd probably think you were a local, as long as you spoke in a brogue. But Roundstone here was very nice. We did stop there for lunch as we're kind of touring the area and trying to get a view of the area. We were staying in Clifton, which is kind of the capital of Connemara, and which is you can see it on this map, but it's there. And as we're going along, we came to this. This is called Dog Bay, and the sand there, it looks like regular sand. I have some in here. I'll pass this around. It's all broken shells. Actually, there's no real sand there. It's all broken shells. So I'll just pass that around. We're in our jackets and hats, and there were kids in swimming. It's a whole different kind of, I guess, idea on summer or whatever, or late fall. Ireland is temperate, so they never have a really hot day. A hot day is like in the low 70s, and but the winters are mild, and they have palm trees growing there. So it's it's sort of, a lot of things don't seem to make a lot of sense sometimes. We were on the Aran Islands. There was a palm tree in front of the B&B we were staying in. And it was one of the coldest places I've ever been in Ireland. The wind never stopped, kind of thing. So these kids were having a ball and going in, and we're standing there in our jackets and winter hats. Yeah, Dog Bay, again, it's very beautiful. This is at the B&B we were staying at in Clifton. They had a peat fire going in a little stove. And I can pass this around too. This will give you some idea. There's just some pictures of Ireland here, and there's one where you can see them harvesting peat, and which they dry out and then burn. So I'll pass that around.
What month were you there?
We were there in September. And so the summer's over, but that, I don't know if you really call it much of a summer anyway. It's a temperate zone, so September would probably be, pretty similar to August or whatever, or July even. A hot day is, again, 75. It's like, oh my God, what's happened? So
I won't need my bathing suit?
Huh?
I won't need my bathing suit?
No, you really won't. You really won't. You won't be fighting for a spot on the beach too often,
Okay.
But I mean, they go swimming there, and everybody has fun there, but it's just what you're used to. It's sort of like, we went to Plum Island in February when we had that 70-degree day, and there were people in swimming.
Yeah.
So, and there were probably some Irish there saying, these people are crazy. So, this is also in Connemara on a hill. This is the memorial to Alcock and Brown, and this kind of blew me away. I don't know if any of you have heard of Alcock and Brown. I always thought the first flight across the Atlantic was Lindbergh, okay, in 1927. So he was the first solo flight, okay? But 8 years before Lindbergh, in 1919, two British aviators, Alcock and Brown, flew from Newfoundland to Ireland. So that was 1919. And they flew in a biplane, a double-winger, open cockpit, and they made, which is kind of shocking when you think about it. They were trying to collect the 10,000 pound, British pound prize for the first flight across the Atlantic. And they were worried that other pilots were in the air on the same day. They didn't really know. and they weren't sure. And so when they came in over Ireland, over Connemara, they said, we have to put down, we have to land so we can call London and say we made it to collect the prize. They were worried somebody might beat them to that. And unbeknownst to them, they were the only flight in the air that day. So they could have saved themselves a little bit. But anyway, they came in and, you know, Connemara looks, a lot of it is flat, it's boggy, and they thought we should be able to put down right here and find a phone and call Galway and then maybe call London or whatever. And so they came in to land. Well, it's a bog, and you can't land on a bog. And they did, and immediately the plane touched down, the wheels dug in, the plane flipped right up this way. They were okay. They were fine, but the plane, you know, was kind of upside down. They couldn't take off from the bog again. They did get a ride to Galway where they called London and did get the 10,000 pound prize. But while they were gone, the locals came out and stripped the plane. Which I guess the canvas on the wings and the body of the plane was highly prized, covering hay mounds in the field, and they took a lot of other things as well. They did eventually get the plane out of there, and it's in a museum now. But as it said in one of the guidebooks, the locals in Connemara were lucky that the pilots simply hadn't done their homework, because there was an RAF base right outside of Galway, just a little bit south of where they were, which would have been a much better place to land. So they got a lot of parts off the plane. Anyway, they had a good time. But it just kind of amazed me that I didn't know about this, that these guys had done this 8 years before Lindbergh. Alcock he was the pilot. He was later killed in a flying accident the next year, but Brown lived to 1948, I believe. He was the navigator. Yeah, right. And these are some of the sites from that hill where the memorial is. And this is the town of Clifton. And while we were in Clifton, in Connemara, they had a music festival, and so all the pubs had Irish music going, which they usually do anyway on a Friday or a Saturday night, but they were doing it every night there, and there were countless pubs. We didn't get in all of them. We got in 2 or 3, and that was enough, I think. But it was very good. It's interesting over there, because locals basically come in and with their instruments, and they just start playing, and they usually play for free beer. You know, they're not paid or anything. They just get a couple beers, and somebody will get up and leave, and another guy will come and take his place. And it's very, very good. It's you know, this typical Irish music, and that's all over the country, really. It's like that all over the country. We're in Kinvara, further south, in County Clare, and which wasn't known for that, but they had 2 pubs in town, and one of them always had music. You know, it just seemed that way. So it was really good. It was a lot of fun. And you see these locals just come in. Clifton was very nice. Probably about the downtown area, was like 2 streets, probably about the size of Newburyport, something like that. Population would be bigger in Newburyport, because as soon as you get outside of Clifton, there's not much, whereas Newburyport is all houses and what have you, so the population would be bigger. But this is a typical Irish type pub, and we really love that stuff. Had a good time. Yeah, go ahead. And I think that's Brownstone again. Okay. Yeah, these are just some of the pictures. These are the 10 bends and or the 10 pins, whichever you want to call them. They have a 5,000 acre national park there, which is very, very beautiful. These are the Connemara ponies that you might have heard of, and they think they would be the tractor of their day, I guess, but they've been bypassed now. But you see them in the fields and what have you there. They believe they were. They have a connection to the horses from the Spanish Armada, which tried to attack England in 1588, and kind of got into a storm, and Drake sent burning ships to them, so they fled this way, and were trying to go around Scotland and Ireland back to Spain, and they get hit with a bad storm up here. And a lot of the ships sunk or crashed on rocks, and so some of the horses made it ashore, apparently, and that's where they think they inbred with the regular horses that were there. So Connemara ponies are a little different from other horses. And this is, again, just some of the beautiful scenery around Connemara. It's a very, very beautiful place. After Connemara, we stop right there. Yes, I have a lot of donkeys over there. This is in Doolin, so this is County Clare. So after we left Connemara, we came down in this direction, and his Galway, we were in Connemara, we came down here. This is County Clare, and this is where the Burn and the Cliffs of Moher and the town of Doolin. Now, Doolin is known for Irish music, and it almost to the point where that's where a lot of people go immediately to hear music. And you're probably better off to go other places now, okay? I think it was really good about 15 years ago, and it still is. I mean, there's still 3 pubs there. There's McCann's, McDermott's, and
I don't remember the
Get the
last
other-
one.
the other one's
Yeah, the 3
name.
major pubs.
yeah, and they all would have music. And they either rotate or they, weekends that all have music. And it's very, very good, but it just seems like it's more crowded there because it's known for music, where if you go pretty much anywhere, you can probably get the music, and it would be good. From Doolin, there's a 5-mile hike along the coast that takes you to the Cliffs of Moher. And the cliffs actually go along there, and you can hike along it to the actual point of the cliffs. And we started to do it, but Linda's a little nervous on heights, and so we didn't make it too far.
Next time he can go by himself.
Yeah, that's the plan. That is the plan.
Is the path really close to the edge then?
Some of it is. Some of it's right up to the edge, and some is back a ways. And you're going through farmland, and it's all private farms, but they have this path that they allow everybody to go, and it's very, very beautiful. Like the Cliffs of Moher, I think they're like 300 feet. Now these here probably aren't quite 300, but they're over 200 right here. And this is close to Doolin right here, because again, I didn't make it 5 miles. We've been there before, but on the actual point of the cliffs and all of that. But, you can see it right here. It's down. That's a little building on the top of the point, actually, from Doolin. Doolin is very nice. It's sort of like, doesn't have a downtown. It's like a main road with houses and a few shops and 3 pubs. And that's what it is, and it's known like everywhere. And it was sort of like, well, Doolin's gonna be big, and you get there and you say, this can't be it. This must be the road to Doolin. That's it. And so it's, it's beautiful. But it is really country, very, very country. It's not a big town at all. One thing you can do from Doolin is you can catch a boat to the Aran Islands. And they have boats to the Aran Islands from there, and they also have them from another area too. I forget the name of it. It's up in Galway, out north of Galway. That's the Aran Islands out beyond. Now the Aran Islands would be these 3 islands right here outside of Galway Bay. And so here's Connemara, here's Galway, and this is County Clare, the Cliffs of Moher, and so on. There's Doolin right down here. And so the Aran Islands are right here. And not this most recent trip, but the trip before that, in around 2006.
Yeah.
We went to the Aran Islands, and it's very, very beautiful. And you wanted to talk about that, right?
Sure. We'll finish with Doolin here. Really
Yeah, this
beautiful
is still
countryside.
Doolin.
Yeah.
One thing about these roads, this is a 2-way road. And it's like just about big enough to get a Volkswagen down, And sometimes you think to yourself, is this one way? because you can't see around a corner or over a hill and everything. And if you stand there long enough, cars will go both ways, you know. And so the roads are very, very small. The highways are big, but once you get off the highways on the really back roads, they're very small. And you know, driving in Ireland today is not like it was. We rented a car. Of course, you have to drive on the left-hand side of the road, and we saw somebody who had rented like a big BMW sedan, and when we were returning our car, we were like, I didn't hit anything, you know? And because you're trying to get close to an edge and make sure you save room for a guy to get by on some of these little country roads. And sometimes there isn't room. You have one has to pull over and pull off the road in a little to let another guy go by. And that's just how it is. That's how that road was right there. And the guy in the BMW came back and the whole right front was totaled, you know. And I'm thinking, that's going to cost him some money. So this was, I think this was part of the path, the beginning of the path, which is almost like a little road itself. It turns into a little path going along those cliffs. But the roads are interesting, and we would get to a rotary called roundabouts, and you just have to, you know, I couldn't have anybody talk to me or say anything because everything's backwards. You know, it's totally backwards. You tend to look the wrong way because you're thinking cars are coming from the other way. And you get used to it after a while.
Joe, is that the path? Is that part of the trail?
That's part
Does
of
it look like that?
I'm on the path. I took those pictures. So this is still Doon area and Doon. Yeah,
That
that's
was
the
our
B&B where we stayed in Doon, actually, that little house.
Okay.
Here you go.
Okay.
Here you go.
So this is Kilronan. This is the town that you stop at when you go to Inishmore, which is the largest of the 3 Aran Islands. So there's Inishmore. Oh, and by the way, these are not our photographs. We were there in 2006, did not have a digital camera, and so I just took things off the internet, things that we saw. Joe, we do have photographs, and Joe will pass that around for you later. Inishmore, Inish means island, More means big. This is the big island of the 3 islands. There's Inishmaan and Inisheer. Very isolated, especially back then. They're only 45 minutes by ferry from the mainland, but people were, some farming, a lot of fishing. They weren't getting out much. And that isolation caused them to keep the Gaelic language. That is the language they spoke at home, at businesses, in schools, and the Gaelic customs and the Irish customs. So it's really kind of a special place. I was blown away by it. These guys will come and meet you at the ferry and offer you a tour of the island with horse and carts. This looks like older than we were there, but the carts are pretty much the same. You can also tour the island by bicycle. You can even take a tour on bicycle. Yeah, and that's what we decided to do. But we didn't take a tour, we did it by ourselves. This was 12 years ago or so, so we were able to do it then. It was a long ride, but it was fun, a lot of fun. And on the island, you're going to see a lot of old ruins, mostly of churches or even monasteries. Some of them are cemeteries, and the cemeteries are still being used by local residents for their own dead. So it's really interesting. You see these ancient monuments to people, and then you see a modern monument with fresh flowers, and it's just incredibly lively. They would gather all the stones, and these stones crisscross the whole island in the center of the island. And it's just what they pulled out of the fields to graze their animals, and it's kind of like a postcard, actually. And this is one of the reasons you go there. This is Dun Angus. Dun means fort. Angus is, pre-Christian god. That's a huge fort, but they're not really sure exactly what it was for. It might have also been for they're pretty sure it was for religious ceremonies as well. And it had 4 concentric walls going out, and then after the 3rd wall there would be large standing stones, and that just looked like a defense situation. Oh no. What happened? Should I turn it on? Here we go. Okay. Let me see if I can go back. Okay. Maybe they're not gonna give me those pictures. That's too bad.
Well, what else would you say about Dunningus and
Yeah.
Ashmore? And then we'll go on to
That
this.
cliff was 200 to 300 feet high above the water. And the way most people approach it is on hands and knees and then on your belly looking over the edge.
Oh.
There's no, and Joe did that, I couldn't even do that. There are no fences. There's a nice sign that says, "Mind your children." And I was thinking, children? Who would ever take a child here? You know, you'd have to hang on to them like glue. There's nobody watching you. There are no officials there. You either use your common sense or you don't come back. It was incredible. They trust you to use your common sense. But very, very, very beautiful. In the late 19th century, the Aarons became a living museum, and that's because of that isolation situation. They were still speaking the language on a daily basis. When we were there in 2006, when they weren't speaking to tourists, they were speaking Gaelic to one another. While we were on our bicycles going through the countryside, there were 2 teenagers standing by one of those stone fences speaking Gaelic. And so the Irish government wanted that to continue. People were thinking of leaving the island, I imagine for jobs or just to go to a more populous, exciting place like the mainland. And they literally would pay people or pay the communities. They would compensate them to stay on the island and to keep the language going. Some of the people there refused to speak English, but by the time we were there, everyone we saw would speak English as well. And that kept people there. Irish poets, Irish writers during the 18th century would go to the Aran Islands to kind of spiff up their own practice of their native language, to see the old customs again. And so it's a really special place. The only thing else is the island is about 12 square miles, and that's it, I think.
Yeah, one thing that was funny when we got off the boat,
Oh, yes.
there was guys that wanted to give you tours. And there was 2 guys there. One guy had a Yankees hat on, and the other guy had a Red Sox. And the crowd, divided based on that.
I have the pictures, I can zip right through these. So you see how people look over the edge? That's the smart way.
Would you spell that name for me?
Aran,
Yeah.
A-R-A-N, and this is Inishmore. This is the island of Inishmore. There are 3 islands.
Is that where your sweater came from?
Yeah, actually.
Okay.
Oh, they have the air, and the place for sweater.
Yeah, that's what it is. We have a big sweater company. Even when, this thing smelled like sheep for like months when I first got it. Can you open these?
Well, not play. No, I managed to open one more, but that's good. I'm glad. Anyhow, they're in that album.
Yeah, I'll pass this around. This is just an album of various places. Some we've already talked about and some we do, but this is, I'll just pass that around.
There we go. That's leaving.
Very
Oh,
good.
wouldn't it be nice if I could get another picture?
I know.
Can you do these right here?
Yes, I can do that. I think we can get right to
Why
one
don't
of
we go
the.
there and then we'll. 'Cause
There we go.
rolling on.
Right. Here we go.
Okay, so after we left this area, County Clare, we went down to the Rock of Cashel, which is right here, which is in that book. It's an old castle, basically, and where the head of the kings of Munster ruled from way, way back. And it's a kind of an iconic castle in Ireland that you see a lot of pictures of. And then we went to Waterford, and that's where some of my family came from, was Waterford. I still have cousins there. And so we toured the Waterford Glass. Waterford itself is kind of off the beaten track. It's not a big tourist area. The tourism tends to be on the west coast more than anywhere else, and somewhat up north as well. But Waterford's kind of almost a working class type city. It, I guess you could say like Gloucester or something, but maybe not. It's the oldest city in Ireland, actually. It goes back, the Vikings founded it and used it as a base for their piracy, and they launched their invasion of England from Waterford. And we toured the Waterford Glass Company here, and it was really amazing. We have several pictures of that. And so you saw the guys blowing the glass and making it and all of that. And you can just flip through this. They had some amazing things that they were making out of glass. And then you wind up in the room where they try to sell you the stuff. The gift shop. Every tour always winds up in a gift shop. And we did buy well, actually our son got us this. We didn't buy anything. Our son did buy us a piece of Waterford glass when he was there. And I'm going to pass this. Well, I'm going to pass it. This is Balik, which is another type of Irish pottery, which is very, very good. And very delicate. And we've already, I think my son's cat broke one. And when they were young, playing with a ball, they broke another one. So we keep replacing them. But anyway, the glass company was great. They really took you through there, and you were encouraged to talk to the people that were working on the glass and ask any questions. And it was set up for tourism. It was really set up for tourism. And very, very,
How
very
long was the
nice.
apprentice time to work in that factory? How long were apprentices?
Oh,
A long
you're
time.
apprentice for
Oh,
years,
years,
and
years,
then
years.
before you were finally allowed to, be in charge of doing something. That's my cousin. And this is Reginald's Tower, which goes back to the Viking days, actually. You can see a Viking ship there. So, and they had a lot of artifacts there. But Waterford is kind of different from a lot of the other cities. It tends to be doing pretty well now. Now there is a shopping center and all of that. When I was first there, when I was first there in 1969, where the shopping center was a big pen for animals, where they auctioned off animals on weekends. And so, I mean, it's changed quite a bit since the 60s, it really has. And Ireland as a whole, I think. This is a dolmen, which is a tomb, a portal tomb. This goes back 4,000 or 5,000 years. And again, these sites are around Ireland. This one has never been excavated, so they don't really know what's under it. They believe it was covered with a mound of dirt at one time, probably several thousand years ago. It's just out in a field, kind of looks like a big mushroom out there. If you go to the next slide, you see a close-up here. And how they move these rocks is really, they really don't understand. But there would be a tomb down underneath there. They did, in the book that's going around, there's a picture of a dolmen there, and they did excavate that, and they found like 35 bodies under it at one time, from Stone Age era, and a couple of them had fractures that had healed, and one had a fracture from like an arrow or something, point that had not healed, so they figure that probably helped him on his leaving. This here is the Hill of Tara, and it's best viewed from aerial views. Okay, we were there, and in that book that's going around, you'll see some pictures of or maybe we have some. Yeah, here's some here, and it really doesn't stand out. It's a ring fort, But again, it goes back to the time of New Grange, where it was also used as a tomb, and it was also used as an astronomical site if you go back far enough. So Ireland is kind of filled with these kind of sites, and a lot of them have been preserved simply because it was a farming area and they did not dig them up. They didn't destroy them like they did across Europe in those cases. That is, yeah, you can see some of the carvings here, which the same as at New Grange and so on.
I was gonna ask at the end, the very beginning, maybe the 6th, 7th, 8th frame, it showed a big stone in front of something. And
That
I
was New
thinking,
Grange, and
What,
yeah.
what does that mean? What
They
about-
don't really know exactly what that means, and so it's on a lot of these carvings from 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, 6,000
The
years ago.
same kind of surroundings.
Yeah,
All right.
and so they know they're all
Quite a few of
connected.
them.
As a matter of fact, if you go to Mystery Hill, American Stonehenge up in Salem, they have some up there. So.
And no one knows
And
why.
no one knows. And so, as to what the connection is there, But it appears to be astronomical because it lines up. Like the New Grange place where I was saying the sun shines in and all of that, you can get in a lottery and maybe win a spot to go in there and be in there when that happens. And they do it every year, and I think they bring in about 30 people. But, of course, you're also gambling that it's going to be a sunny day, which is, you got a chance at that, it might happen, but probably not very often. All right, this is Iceland, and we had talked about going to Iceland for a long time. We always take like cheap flights to Europe, and that usually is Icelandic Airways. And what Icelandic Airways does is they land in Iceland, and then they tell you about the beauties of Iceland, and they tell you that you can get off the plane and stay here for several days and then continue on, and it won't cost you any extra on the flight itself. And so we finally did it. And we stayed there for a couple of days. So I'm going to turn this over to Linda.
And this is a short one, so we should finish on time, folks. Iceland is in between Europe and North America. And it's amazing because it's so incredibly full of volcanic activity that the tectonic plates underneath are separating. So the tectonic plate that supports Europe and Africa is heading, that would be east, and the tectonic plate for North America is heading west. And lava pours into these cracks that are created, which causes them to separate even more. And it's estimated that Iceland is gaining about an inch every year of territory because of that. But you see so many geysers and volcanoes and hot springs. It's just amazing. So there is a population of about 337 people.
337,000.
337,000 people. It's just a little mistake, Joe. The size of Ohio. Very moderate temperature like Ireland. In January it's about 31 degrees on average, and in July it's about 52. Many hot springs. And that would be Reykjavik, I believe, and that's the major city.
No, that's not.
That's not Reykjavik?
That's it.
Okay. Most of the population, about half of it, lives in or around Reykjavik. And the rest kind of scattered along the Golden Road and possibly the Ring Road, which is the larger road going around.
Yeah.
Most of the population, go ahead.
Yeah, Reykjavik is right here, and we were there for a couple of days, and we did the Golden
Road, yeah.
and which is a loop right in here.
Can do it in a day.
You do it in a day. We took a couple days to do it, whereas and most of the population is right in this, or they're around the edge of the country.
Yeah. And that's what it looks like. Yep. And the population is on the perimeter. The countryside is mountains, glaciers, and solid lava.
And you can see steam vents coming out here.
Everywhere. Those are all steam vents. And in people's yards, there'll be a steam vent coming out from all the geothermal activity that's happening below the earth. That is the Carrad crater. And that was caused about 6,500 years ago when the magma chamber collapsed. It's about 180 feet deep. And it's beautiful with the lichen and the mosses. That's what the countryside looks like outside of the main city. These are ravines that you see all over Iceland. When the Vikings came, they cut down the trees, they totally deforested their living areas. They haven't been able to grow trees back very easily because of the wind. But what does grow is about 500 types of mosses and 450 types of lichen. And it's beautiful. Okay, and this was a walkway to a small waterfall in a national park called Pingvella. But then, there are lots of waterfalls.
Yeah, that's where, isn't that where the government started or whatever?
Yes, yeah, right. The Icelandic government, the Vikings formed the first democracy, the first parliamentary form of government. It was called the Althing. And they pride themselves on what they say is the first democracy in Europe.
I think it was 900,
Yeah, 980?
something like that.
980. This is a geyser. Geysers are all over too. And this particular geyser erupts every 5 minutes. And again, these people trust you to use your head, stand on the right side. It's very hot water, it's steam, and you make sure that the wind is behind you. But they let you get close, you know, they don't control things such as much.
Yeah, they had a little rope, well, you can see the
Ah, there you
rope.
go, that'll keep you out, yeah. And that is Gullfoss. That's the great big waterfalls. It's made up of two smaller ones which bend and it becomes a huge cascade.
Yeah, you probably can't see it, but these are people lined up right
Yeah.
there. So, I mean, it's a huge waterfall
Yeah.
and very, very beautiful. One thing about that area though, as soon as you step outside this, you're constantly 30-mile-an-hour wind in your face. And it was extremely windy all the time.
All the
It's
time.
windy all the time.
And wet a lot too.
Yeah, well, it's temperate zone. That's a glacier, actually, that I took took that picture from the parking lot of the waterfall, Gullfoss, the waterfall. And I look and said, God, there's a glacier right there. So, I mean, it's just interesting, the whole panorama is just so different than anything I've ever seen.
Hot springs. There are lots of hot springs. The most famous one for tourists is called the Blue Lagoon. A lot of tour buses, but they offer a lot of nice things like massage and all of this stuff. We decided to go to the Secret Lagoon, and there's only one tour bus in the Secret Lagoon. And this is it, and that was much more low key. You could buy beer or wine and sit in the hot pools. These are like little streams going by, bubbling hot water. It's very strange. And that's it. That's the pool. They give you the noodles to rest on. Most people had a glass of wine with them. It was freezing out. The wind could almost blow you over. But you just run out, jump in, and you feel really good. See? Yeah. My hair was blowing.
Mine wasn't.
His was. So the Vikings settled Europe, and they had a Viking museum, and we got to stand in the Viking ship.
It is a very very beautiful place.
It is amazing.
Very expensive, as far as, you know, anything, everything has to be imported, pretty much. They, you know, wood, if you needed wood to build a shed in your backyard, it's imported wood. I mean, everything is, so the restaurants were high. I remember we went into
A tourist
country store at
Yeah.
one point, just
Right.
off the beaten track, and a little bag of potato chips is like $5 or something. And so it's just very high, and standard of living is high, though.
Yeah, they traditionally always had a high standard of living. They had one bad time. Joe was telling me that because of government corruption, the country lost a great deal of money, but they pulled out of that. They have a higher standard of living now. They use the kroner for their currency, and $1 US is worth 100 kroner. And so things were very expensive for us, so their wages will match their prices, because people feel comfortable and they're doing quite well. They pride themselves on their Viking heritage, and they pride themselves on being independent and very hardworking. They tend to work longer hours than most people in Europe, and they're proud of that. And they have a good social system. Their retirement is insured, and everybody is medically insured, and so they don't have those worries. And they're nature lovers. You'd have to be to live
Yeah,
there.
everybody seems to be doing well.
Yeah.
I know we're driving around, and you would see where farm and under a mountain, but just back enough from the mountain, and from the mountain you would see these big boulders that have rolled down
Yeah.
and are out in the field. And some of them are bigger than the house.
Yeah.
But the house is built just far enough away that the boulders never quite get there. And maybe that happened 200 years ago or 500 years ago. I don't know. But occasionally one's going to come down, I guess. One interesting thing about it is they have one phone book, and everybody in the country's in that phone book. It's like 300, a little over 300,000 people.
You can see the wind there. That's our friend Judy. We traveled together, and look at her hair. I mean, it was.
Yeah, it's always windy.
It's always windy.
But beautiful, and like we did this golden circle that's called, where they have a number of these things to see that they list. And if you got off the plane, say you're playing to Europe, and you wanted to spend a couple days there, this is a B&B we rented, right?
We tend to use Airbnbs, which are just private homes that are renting out an apartment or a room. And this is a basement apartment, and it was lovely and very inexpensive. And people are very nice. They leave you alone and you give you the key. It's a good way to travel.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think that's it. Then back to China.
Yeah, my son was there for a week, him and his wife, and they traveled a little bit further out, and they went to a hot spring,
Oh, a hot
where they had to
spring.
hike into it, so
Yeah.
they could be by themselves, I guess, or not have a crowd of people. And so they went in, and I think they took a few cans of beer with them, and they
Right.
were floating around, drinking a little beer. And then, you know, I had to get out. Now, it was like a walk out, and he said it was snowing. I had to get out and get dried off and put on all the gear and then walk out, and so.
Rough hike back.
Yeah, rough hike back. But very nice. It's very isolated. You see stories on it in various magazines, and it's always people that really go and super enjoy it, that really go out, are people that are into hiking and that sort of thing. But as far as just getting there a couple days and doing that loop, you don't even have, we rented a car, but you don't have to do that. They run bus tours, and they'll take you to all those sites and back to your hotel and the whole thing. So they make it as easy for you as possible, actually. And it is very, very interesting, very different.
Did you see the Northern Lights there? Do they
No.
have? They do have it,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, they do.
Yes.
But again, it's the same, you always see those advertisements, come and see it, but it's cloudy and rainy a lot.
Yeah.
You know, very similar to Ireland, it's temperate, and so you might hit it, you might not. you know, it's, because we knew some, well, Chris was there for a week, they never saw the Northern Lights.
Yeah, they have tours and stuff for that, but they, you know, they tell you we're going to go look for the Northern Lights.
Yeah, and they say if we don't see him, we'll go tomorrow night, we'll
Yeah.
keep trying, you know, and sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. I think right now there's a tour on Travel Zoo of Ireland for 6 nights, flights from Boston, hotels, and a rental car for $800 a person, I think, so. if you're-
Yeah.
if
There's a
you're-
site called travelzoo.com, and they every week put up any specials and, you know, that you can take to Europe, Mexico, South America. If there's a good special, they will advertise it.
Even around the
It's
U.S.
the only way we travel.
Yeah.
What is the name of it again?
Travel Zoo, so it's COO, travelzoo.com. And that's our go-to site because it is so inexpensive.
That's it. Anybody have any questions?
Nice.
What country does Iceland belong to?
It's independent. It was part of Denmark. And they, I forget when they got their independence. This
1944.
44.
Maybe.
Yeah, and the first time I think I landed there was in 1969 in Ireland. And it was, we landed at a U.S. Air Force base.
Yeah.
And so U.S. still does have a base there, I believe, but it's no longer a regular airport, which has changed quite a bit. But they're part of NATO, and you know, it's, Ireland is, the Republic of Ireland is, they use the euro today, whereas England and Northern Ireland do not. And Iceland has their own currency, the
The
krona,
krona.
they don't use the euros. Yeah.
What's that statue?
That is a Viking sword sticking in the ground.
Yeah.
And it's in the middle, yeah, it's in the middle of a rotary.
Okay.
And I just said, oh, I gotta take a picture of that.
There's one on the line.
Can't pull it out either.
No.
Yeah, they,
How many trips a year do you plan? 1, 2?
Yeah,
Whatever, you get a deal or something?
Yeah.
if I can
And
talk
it's-
her
and it
into
is
2.
someplace, yeah, if you can talk me into it,
Yeah.
and if it's, the price is right, and someplace we want to see, yeah.
Yeah, so you could go pretty much any time,
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know,
which you'll get good
that's
deals.
it, that's
Yeah.
right. And the
But-
people we see on these tours are our age, you know, they're
Yeah.
senior citizens, they got
Mature.
the time, and,
Yeah, mature age.
And try to stay away from the summer, basically, because the summer, that's when it's really crowded and tourists. And if you go in spring or fall, the weather's really good
Yeah.
and the crowds are down. Although the crowds are picking up now, but you still
Yeah.
don't have the students and the kids and all that stuff, so it's nice. It's very nice.
So where are we going next?
We're ready to talk already.
Well, Disney doesn't have